So, have you ever been in a situation where somebody says something to you or does something to you that left you feeling maybe hurt or angry? Okay, if you say no to that one, I don't think you're telling the truth, right? Everybody's had an experience where it's made you angry, right? Because I'm the only one, right? Yeah, right. Right, but what if it goes beyond that? Right? What if it continues on and anger becomes something much darker, like hate? Or you start to feel like you have a grudge against someone. Now, we don't use that word a lot, but we might see someone as our enemy or someone who is persistently in opposition to us. And so as we have those kinds of feelings, anger and persistent hurt and hate and grudges and seeing people as enemies, if we think about it, if we're honest with ourselves, we may never say this out loud, but sometimes those feelings can feel kind of good, don't they? So don't we feel justified sometimes in our anger, our righteous anger, which, by the way, appears nowhere in the Bible, by the way? Only God has righteous anger. We don't. Right? But somehow we grab onto those things and we can even start to have our identity in it. And sometimes as we start to look around at people, and we talked about this a bit last week, this idea of judging people, that we look around and we see people as stupid or, what don't they understand or, what's wrong with those people? And we hold on to these feelings of looking down on people, of being, holding hate towards people, holding anger towards people, feeling fully justified in that. But then something starts to happen, right? That emotion that we were feeling so kind of, so powerful because we were holding on to it, suddenly we realize that it's got a hold of us. That we become someone who's angry all the time, someone who's hurt all the time, someone who starts to see enemies everywhere I look. We certainly live in a time where, depending on what color jersey you're wearing, blue or red, the other one is the enemy, right? So what I want to talk about today is the idea of letting go. That we love to hold on to those feelings. We do. We feel justified somehow in looking at people that way and feeling that way, that we often, and this builds very much on what we talked about last week, that just like being judgmental helps us feel better about ourselves, being angry towards people and holding grudges can help us to see people as less so that we can feel like more. Now, Jesus talks a lot about these kinds of issues, and he kind of gives us some guidance on how he says we should address these things. And the verse we're going to look at today, or the couple of verses we're going to look at today, are ones that you have almost definitely heard at some point in your life. Because they again come from that same message that we looked at from Jesus last week, what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Right, where Jesus has this kind of big speech that we have recorded for us, and that he kind of talks about what life as a Jesus follower really looks like, the life that God is looking for us to experience. And I think it's important to remember that although we have this recorded in a couple of places in our Bible, the things that Jesus says in that message, he likely repeated hundreds of times. Right, as he traveled from place to place, that his followers would have heard it over and over again. Where he went, he would share these things. And when it comes to this issue of dealing with dark emotions, here's what Jesus says. He says, "But to you who are willing to listen, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who hurt you." Now that sounds kind of upside down, sounds kind of backwards. Doesn't it sound kind of wimpy? Right? Like winners don't think that way, right? Right? Winners think different than that, right? That we're supposed to hate our enemies. Right? We're supposed to crush people who hate us. Right? That we are supposed to, if someone curses me, curse them back. Oh man, and if they hurt me, I'm going to hurt them twice as much next time. How often do we think that way? Right? Because we think that makes us strong, right? We live in a culture that claims that is strength. That you don't negotiate with the other side, you crush the other side. I don't care who gets hurt in the process. As long as I win, I don't care. But the thing that's kind of funny, Jesus didn't see that as winning. Jesus actually saw that kind of crush the enemy mindset as not winning. Well, that's unusual. You know, it's always the seniors who don't silence their phones, too, by the way. That was just seconding the idea, right? That's what it was, yeah. Right, sort of thing, right? So why did Jesus not see that as winning? Because Jesus prioritized something else. He didn't prioritize position in this life or this world. He prioritized people. He prioritized relationships. You know that we know what Jesus prioritized. He prioritized the Father's business. And what is the Father's business? I've been repeating this a lot lately because I think it's something that I want to keep in mind, and I hope you do as well. Jesus shows us what God considers most important. 3 things. Right? One is, what did Jesus do? He healed. What is healing? It relieves suffering. So the Father's business is relieving suffering, both physical and emotional. Right? Jesus pointed people towards Jesus, what we call evangelism, which is a word that's kind of gotten redefined over the years, but ultimately it's about sharing faith and just living in a way and being willing at appropriate times to talk about why you believe in Jesus. So that's 2. And the third one is discipleship. Jesus taught, where he taught people about God. He taught people how to be closer to God. So those 3 things are the Father's business, and Jesus' top priority is the Father's business. And so crushing our enemies, destroying those who oppose us, hating people who see the world differently than we do, Jesus says that doesn't fit anywhere in the scheme that really is important. Because if we think about it, that mindset of, crushing our enemies and hurting people and just kind of being kind of the most vicious versions of those emotions, what is that really about? That's about pushing to the front of the line. Right? It's about making sure that I get everything that I deserve. But if you're someone who's put your faith in Jesus, do you really want everything you deserve? I don't. Right? Because it's not about pushing to get everything you deserve. It's about, we talk about this over and over again. It's about living a life of purpose, right? That you were created on purpose with a purpose. That God has called you to do things that are meaningful with your life. And the most meaningful things are the Father's business. Relieving suffering, pointing towards Jesus, and helping each other and ourselves grow in our understanding of what that means. Now, I don't think that we consciously think in terms of that idea of pushing to the front of the line. I don't think that's how we commonly see the world. Or I should say that. I don't say how we consciously, I want to amend that. I don't say that's how we consciously see the world. I fear it is commonly how we see the world. And what is that going to do? Like, if you actually look at the world as something to push to the front of the line of, or something to embrace things like anger and hate and enemies and grudges, what's that going to do to your view of the world? It's going to take us back to what we talked to last week. What does being judgmental do to your view of the world? It causes you to see the world as an ugly thing. It causes you to look at the world, as we talked about last week, through dirty windows. Right? And the more we embrace those emotions and the more times we spend hanging on to those emotions, the more ugly and more dirty we're going to see the world. And our job, if you were someone who's put your faith in Jesus, our job is to be what? The light of the world. Yet those kinds of emotions like hate and anger and grudges, those are not light emotions. Those are dark emotions. Right? And I'm going to repeat a verse that I read last week. Jesus says this, "For you will be treated as you treat others." Right? If you go through life carrying negativity and darkness and hate and anger, what are all of your interactions going to be like? Right? If you show up with that on your mind, right? If you get up, on the wrong side of the bed every day, maybe you need a new bed, sort of thing, right? Right? That you're carrying around all this kind of nastiness because you start to view people as someone to be opposed, as opposed to someone to have a relationship, to get to know, to walk through life with. Right? It is very easy to adopt a mindset of everyone is bad and dirty and wrong, and there's this kind of small set of people that, of course, includes me, that is all perfect and good, and everyone else should be opposed. And the thing that I would like to encourage us to do is to think about cleaning our windows. That idea that we talked about last week, that this idea of releasing judgmentalism is a really important point, right? That if you walk around judgmental and you look at everyone with judgment, you're never going to move past that. But the thing to understand is that not being judgmental is just kind of the beginning, right? There's other emotions like anger and grudges and seeing people as enemies, right? Those are things that stick around. Like you can say that, okay, well, I'm not going to be judgmental, but if I'm angry all the time, like what if we recorded you in your car alone in traffic? Yeah. I couldn't play that here, could I? So what are we going to do? We are going to, instead, love your enemy. And apparently whoever is in front of you is your enemy, right? And to be clear, but I drive like 80, 85 miles an hour all the time, right? Like I'm admitting that on camera. That's really smart. But I do. I'm always in a hurry. I'm always, and George Carlin used to say, why is it everyone who's faster than you is a maniac and everyone who's slower than you is an idiot, right? It's kind of that way when we drive. But I will say, and I've had to admit this to myself, those things that I say alone in the car, or those explosive emotions that I have in the car, those things are in there all the time. Right? Maybe when we're around other people, we keep a lid on it a little bit better, but it's still boiling inside. Because it's the things we say when we think no one will hear or no one will know that reveal what's boiling inside of us, right? And that's just not healthy. That's just not good, right? It's certainly not good for your physical health. It's not good for your emotional health. It's not good for your spiritual health. It's certainly not good for the relationships in your life. So we have to make a choice that we're not going to live that way, right? That we have to, that may involve seeing a counselor, understanding why that stuff boils inside of you all the time. Because you may have grown up in a family where that's normal. But it's not normal. It's certainly not healthy, right? So we want to move past those things. So part of what we need to do is do the work to get past those things, to make that conscious choice. And if you need to get support and help to do that, do that. But the thing to understand is that when you enter into a situation that's going to be tense, you've got two choices. You can react or you can respond. Now, let's think about that. If I give you it's not me. Let's say your doctor gives you a medication. If you react to that medication, is that a good thing? No, you got hives or something, right? If you respond to the medication, it actually does what it was supposed to do, right? And the thing is that we enter into tense situations, and our tendency is to react to whatever that first emotion that rises up pops out. And oftentimes we have, as I mentioned earlier, kind of these kind of things boiling inside of us. But a response is something intentional. A response is something you have planned for, that you've thought about how you're going to handle. Right? So we want to actually kind of spend our time kind of thinking about those sort of things that, hey, if you're going to enter into a tense situation, okay, if this goes the way it might, how am I going to respond? How am I not going to just react? How do I move forward with that? If someone views me as their enemy, I'm going to respond in a loving way. I'm not saying you let people walk over you, right? But you respond in an appropriate and loving way, right? That if someone hates you, right, you're going to do good for them, right? If someone tries to hurt you, you're going to pray for them, right? Just imagine that. Just imagine that every time someone hurt you, you prayed for them. Now, I want to just do a quick aside on that, right? When I talk about if someone hurts you and you pray for them, Jesus at no point in time calls you to stay in an abusive relationship, right? If you are in an abusive relationship, get out of that relationship. Pray for someone, but put some distance between them. If you need support on that, get support. Move away from that, right? Behaving as Jesus describes here is not about subjecting yourself to abuse. Step away from those things. Yes, you can pray for your abuser, but don't be alone with them, sort of thing, right? That's really the sort of thing that Jesus is calling us to do, is to recognize all the things that are going on and responding in ways that are loving, but also being safe, right? We don't want to lose sight of that. That often people have tried to manipulate these words to say that you should stay in an abusive relationship. There's no support for that. Don't listen to those people. If you don't believe me, dig into it. But you can pray for someone without being subjected to them. But now if we kind of look at the larger picture, right? The larger picture of kind of living the way Jesus describes here, right? If you're going to do that, if you're going to actually kind of embrace that as a general idea of being loving towards our enemies, that if someone, hates us, we're going to pray for them, those sort of things. We're going to bless people as we encounter them. That if you'll do that, it will actually change the way you experience life, right? Because it is that idea of kind of cleaning our windows. And even beyond that if you're going to try to live the way Jesus describes here, that's not something that we can really achieve on our own. So if you're going to really live this way as Jesus describes, what's going to have to be a regular part of your life? Prayer time. Right? When you wake up in the morning, say, Jesus, just help me to respond as you're calling to me respond in these situations ahead today. I don't even know what they are. Right? Help me to not react when I step into a difficult circumstance. Help me not to be a person who has, anger boiling out of me. Help me to see those situations that are causing that anger to be there all the time. Help me to be brave enough to get support for those things when I need to. Right? To do those sort of things. And if we do that, we're going to start to lean on Jesus more. We're going to start to lean on God more. And as I say that, and people say, well, you're leaning on God, you're leaning on Jesus. Well, aren't you tough enough to get through life by yourself? Nope, I'm not. Right? I have a much better life since I have embraced the presence of Jesus in my life. Because here's the thing. I don't think that leaning on the creator of the universe is weakness. Right? Weakness is refusing to accept the issues that we have in our lives. Weakness is refusing to be honest with ourselves when we have a persistent issue of anger or dark emotions. Strength is facing those things, calling God into it, inviting God to walk with you in that. And the thing is kind of interesting that as we do that, if we would actually make a regular part of our lives, like starting out each day with prayer about, Lord, just help me to respond as you would have me to as I go into this day. When you're going to walk into a difficult situation, like, I don't know, Thanksgiving. There's that person. I was talking to a person the other day. He said when he was a kid, when the family would come over for Thanksgiving, all the kids would make bets on who would storm out the door first. Which is kind of funny, but kind of sad. Right? I mean, he's in his 20s, right? That's his strongest memories of his childhood's Thanksgivings in a Christian home, by the way. Right? That's not good. Right? But if we will actually say, hey, Thanksgiving is tough for me. Trust me, I got family challenges too, right? But pray up before you get there. To pray for that just that, Uncle Joe's going to drink too much. He's going to say a bunch of things about his political party, whatever that happens to be. And you know what? I'm not going to engage. Because you know what? You're not going to change his mind anyway. And he's not going to change yours. So why are we doing this in the first place? Right? And if you do that throughout your life, and you start to make this conversation with God, your relationship with God, your relationship with Jesus begins to change. And it stops being a relationship with some kind of far off thing that people told me about when I was a kid, and I'm not really sure it's there or not. And instead of being a foreign relationship that someone told you about when you were a kid, it becomes personal. And it becomes real. You start to realize that if you get into that cycle of prayer time, and then you're just engaging with the Bible, as we talked about a few weeks ago, even if it's just a little bit each day, just a verse of the day even, you start to see there's a conversation going on, a conversation that develops over time. And through a conversation, you develop a relationship. I mean, my marriage to my wife would have never happened if I didn't talk to her first, right? We talk to each other. Now, hopefully that continues throughout our lives. Hopefully in your relationships, it's continuing throughout your lives, right? But the idea is closeness and it's kind of an odd word, but intimacy, being really emotionally close with someone, comes from knowing someone and talking with that person and talking to them and hearing from them. Well, I truly believe that that relationship you have in a healthy marriage or a healthy parent-child relationship are models for the relationship that God is seeking with us. And he wants to be in that conversation with us so that we can grow in him. And so as we do that, and we apply these things in our lives, does that mean you're never going to have any challenges ever? The answer is no, by the way. You are going to have challenges, right? You are going to have challenges. I did a double negative on you there, right? But you are going to have challenges. So what do? Like, you've got that person in your life, Uncle Joe, who I just made up here, right? Who's going to talk about his political point, whatever that happens to be. He's going to be annoying, right? He's going to be annoying. He's going to get on your nerves. And you're probably getting on somebody else's nerves too. But if you have someone in your life who just kind of pushes you and taxes you all the time, does that mean that there's eventually a time where you don't have to embrace these ideas of Jesus? Is it okay to stop forgiving people? Is there someone in your life that's just man, every time I talk to them, they are just difficult. Every time I try to be nice to them, they're still mean to me. Every time I try to be a blessing to them, it seems like they hate me more. Is it okay to just say, you know what? Forget about it. I don't care about them anymore. Well, here's the answer. The answer is Jesus seems to point to the fact that we're not supposed to get to that place. Because this idea that we are challenged, that to want to say at some point enough is enough. I don't want to forgive people anymore. I just don't want to be this way anymore. It's something that actually the Apostle Peter actually struggled with. Now think about this, right? Peter walked with Jesus. He was there. He followed him at these talks. He's the one who was closest to Jesus. He would have heard this kind of talk over and over again. It would seem to be, if anyone would have understood what Jesus meant by being loving, being forgiving, praying for people who hurt you, those sort of things, it would have been Peter. But according to the gospel writer Matthew, Peter still had some questions. So according to the gospel writer Matthew, this exchange happens between Peter and Jesus. It says, Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how often should I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times? Am I in the right place here? Yeah, 7 times. Now, doesn't that seem arbitrary? 7 times? Why would he say 7 times? Well, it turns out that Peter was trying to show Jesus, I've been listening. Because here's the thing. In the first century, the religious leadership of that time taught that you were expected to forgive someone 3 times. Right, so if someone did something against you, first time, you forgive them. Second time, you forgive them. They do it a 3rd time. The first century religious leadership said, 3rd time, still forgive them. But 4th time, you don't have to forgive them anymore. So Peter's like, Jesus, I've been listening. And all the other people are saying I should forgive 3 times. And I know you keep talking about this idea of forgiveness, of kind of, continuing to be compassionate towards people. So 7 times is the answer, right? I don't know where he got 7. My theory is twice as much plus 1. I doubt he thought about that much, honestly, right? But he says, so 7 times, right? That's way more than other people forgive. And what's Jesus going to say? Jesus says, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Now, I always like to point out that the Bible was not written in English, right? It was this part was probably written in Greek, right? I didn't check that beforehand, but I'm pretty sure it's probably written in Greek. So you'll notice, though, if you read this same verse in different English translations of the Bible, some of them will say 70 times 7. Others will say 77 times. So which is it? Is it 77 or 70 times 7, which is 490, just to show off for a minute? So which is it? Is it 77 or 490? It's limitless. Jesus is using hyperbole, right? Using an extreme answer to make the point that it's limitless, that we are supposed to continue to be forgiving. Now, again, I'm going to reiterate what I said before. If you're in an abusive relationship, that does not mean you subject yourself to abuse. Get your distance. But Jesus says that we are to be forgiving. Now, why does Jesus say that we are meant to be forgiving without limit? Well, it gets back to something that Jesus would say later. Jesus says to love others how? As I have loved you. Do you want Jesus to stop forgiving you? I sure want to make sure he keeps forgiving me. Right? Because we all go through our lives doing things that hurt God, right? That are offensive to God, that hurt Jesus, right? That we do those things. How do we know that? Right? Because we know that every human being is a loved child of God. Right? So every time you or I do something that is self-destructive, well, that hurts God. That hurts Jesus. Every time you or I do something that harms someone else, that hurts God. That hurts Jesus. Every time we don't provide help when we could have provided help, that means we didn't help someone who was important to God. That hurts God. That hurts Jesus. I'll go one step further. We talk about, if we get back to kind of the four core elements here, right, of loving your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who hurt you. Have you ever used God's name in a curse? Don't raise your hand. Have you ever used God's name in a curse? Have you ever used Jesus' name in a curse? Have you ever been so angry that maybe you cursed God? I have. When my wife's cancer came back, I was so mad at God, I can't even tell you. I can't even tell you how mad I was. And he blessed us anyway. Right? That we struggle with those things. And we want God to keep forgiving us and loving us and blessing us. And if we will embrace these things not as ideas, but as practices in our lives, knowing that it is hard to live this way, something will begin to happen. Because we start to be more loving and more of a blessing to the people around us, and God will shine through that, and God will do something with that. Right? And as we start to forgive people over and over again, we start to realize that forgiving costs something. When you forgive someone who keeps doing the same sorts of things to you, that hurts. When we keep doing the same sorts of things over and over again, God forgives us, but it costs something. It costs Jesus' death and resurrection. Right? That as we live this way and we realize that to try to embrace these values, we've got to lean on God. We become more aware of God's presence in our lives. Again, it gets back to that growing closer in a relationship. Because when do you talk to God most? When things are going fantastic or when things are really going wrong? Right? We all, me included, right? We lean towards the going wrong. But if we are looking at our lives as, no, I'm going to try to embody these values. I've got to stay in connection with God, even in the positive times. I'm staying in that conversation. And I'm realizing how much God loves me. Right? Because if I'm going to keep forgiving someone over and over, I'm going to embrace a love towards them. Right? And it helps me to see that, well, loving that way is a challenge. And if that's what it's like for me to love and what it takes for me to love and how much I just kind of embrace that mindset, helps me to see how much God loves us. Helps us see how much Jesus loves us. So the things that I really want to invite us to do is to recognize that, kind of pointing back to that thing I started with Peter, that you are a royal priesthood. Right? That you are God's presence in this life. Right? That the way you live your life matters. Right? We do not change the world by preaching at people. Right? We change the world by living out the values that Jesus points us towards. Yes, we come together and we have times like this where we do teach, right? And that helps us grow in our discipleship. Right? When we talk to someone that we know and they see that we are living in a way that embodies this kind of an unimaginable lifestyle of blessing people and loving people, people may ask where that comes from, and at that time you can talk about your faith. But basically what you do matters far more. Just to pull another Patriots reference into this, because I haven't had enough yet today. Mike Vrabel, the head coach of the Patriots, he says, I tell my players every day, I see better than I hear. I see better than I hear. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Don't tell me what you believe. Show me. Go out there and live it and embrace it and embody it. That's what, that's if we will do that in our lives, that's what brings change and transformation into this world. That's what gives us a fuller life. And that what allows us to embrace this idea of understanding that you have a real purpose. I mean, you don't reach a point in your life where your purpose is done, right? If you're still breathing, you're still moving, you can still get around. God has a purpose for you. Step into it, live it. Because if we're not doing that, we don't really embrace all that life has for us, all that God has for you. But if we'll do that, one step at a time, being patient with ourselves, being compassionate towards ourselves as we fall down, as we stumble, and extending that compassion to others, that's when we start to move on that path and down that road to living in the fullness of the purpose that God has called you to.